Welcome back, and in this video I'm going to show you instead of a while loop I'm going to show you something called a for loop. They are sort of similar and they do pretty much the same, but a for loop can be more specialized than a while loop. So we have a little bit more things we can use, operate and do with this for loop. So it's very similar to when you wrote your while loop, but again, instead of having me to print out my variable like I did before up here, var x, I can actually I'll just leave this one and I'll type the for loop below. So for, and I'm going to use the letter I. And again, the reason for this is, as I've read, it's an old way from back in the 70s or 80s when they started doing this, that they needed a specific letter for this, and I was short for integers because they use numbers a lot, but I'm not quite sure, but there's a reason for it. Anyways, here we're setting I to 0 like we did up with the x, and then we're using a semicolon to mark that we're done with this part of it. And now we're going to do like we did in the while. We're going to create a I is smaller than, let's go with 10. And we can actually go equals to also, just to add a little bit more. And as we did up here, we also have to say that x equals x plus 1. We have to tell it how the system actually needs to loop through things. So it's going to, I'm going to use the I again, and I'm going to use something called plus plus, which means I'm going to plus each loop or the value of I with 1 like I did up here. So it's the same thing up here, just with an I instead. So for each loop I'm adding 1 extra number to I, and this is called an auto increment. I'll just spell it out, auto increment, which means that for each new, if it was an item in a web shop, each new product, it would just add another number to it. So the ID number would be ID number 1, ID number 2, ID number 3, and so on. So now I have my expressions up here, and I can do the same again. So console log, and again I'm just going to print out the numbers here, and I won't break it, I have to change the spec. So when I is 0 and I starts at 0 and I has to be smaller or equal to 10, and for each loop I add 1 more number. So this should start from 0 to 10, and it starts here, and the top 5 is the while loop instead. So these are two different ways of writing a loop. Which is more correct, it depends on the situation, but I tend to see more people using the for loop than I do seeing the while loop. I personally like this one more, but it's up to you which way you feel like working. There are small differences to them if you need them to do specific things, but you can use both for most. But again, most people use a for loop that I am aware of. Right, so see you in the next video. Hi, and I'm just going to add a little bit extra to the for loops before I continue, because I did this to the while loop, where I stated what the different thing was. And if we look at the for loop, and these three things here, in the while loop I wrote this as an expression, whereas in the for loop we look at them as, we can look at them as a statement. So statement 1, statement 2, and statement 3. So this would be statement 1, this would be statement 2, and this would be statement 3. That means that statement 1 is something you execute before the loop. So set I, or our variable I, to 0, and then it goes to the second one, so the condition for our loop. You are going to run this loop as many times as that condition is true. In this case, from I and then up to 10. And the last one is what is going to happen every time we execute a loop. So every time it runs through this, the iteration of the loop. So again, we can also look at this like the initialization of the loop in the first part, the condition, and what updates should the loop have. Right, that's just what I wanted to show you as an extra thing.